Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be having a look and a listen at Counterpoint in action in the hands of the greatest writer of counterpoint ever, Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, Bach wrote tons of music, of course, but he wrote 15 two-part inventions. They're catalogued in the BWV catalogue as 772 to 786, if you want to find a score of those. And we're looking at his two-part invention in C major. And it may well be a piece that's familiar to you. And so on. Gorgeous pieces, these, as always is the case with Bach, of course. What we're really thinking about here is, how does Bach work his counterpoint? Lots of people, when they want to write counterpoint, are a bit intimidated by it and frequently get into something where they kind of write an idea, then they copy it in the other hand, and then they write something else, copy it in the other hand, write something else, copy it in the other hand. And on we go on this kind of gravy train of kind of, here's an idea, here it's been copied. But actually, how do we kind of do that in a more successful way? Let's see what we can learn from Bach. So he starts off with this contrapuntal idea. That's the kind of basic idea, isn't it? So this first group of semiquavers with the quaver that finishes, or 16th notes with the 8th note that finishes. What's the nature of that? Well, we start on the tonic note, we go up to the 4th by step. Then he has this little pattern where we've got 2 falling thirds. And then we're rising to the dominant. So we've made an overall journey from the tonic to the dominant, mixture of conjunct movement with a bit of disjunct movement. So that's often how Bach will design something, whether it's a fugue subject or a bit of contrapuntal design. Okay, well, what does he do then? He copies this thing in the left hand just about exactly. Okay, we've got an octave leap at the end of it, but otherwise it's the same. Now, meanwhile, in the right hand, he kind of carries on with this idea. Now, one reason that this is going in quavers instead of semiquavers, or 8th notes instead of 16th notes, is because, of course, we've got these busy 16th notes or semiquavers in the left hand. We could have the same rhythm in the right hand, but he's trying to establish some independence. Perhaps the more important line is this left hand imitating this right hand. You might say this is of lesser significance, but it's not insignificant. And it's a contrasting idea, a very simple one. C, down 1 to the leading note, back to C, on to D. So it's all going by step. And he puts this little ornament in, which of course just makes that a little bit of a distinctive difference. So it comes across as a sort of contrasting idea, isn't it? So it's not just kind of, we've got this thing and we're imitating. We've built in a contrasting idea. Now, you notice when the left hand plays this opening thing, it doesn't then go on to deal with the contrasting idea. Why does Bach not do that? He could have done, couldn't he? Arguably, it might have been a bit over predictable. You know, if the left hand had done exactly the same thing as the right hand extension. So what he's done in the right hand is say, here's the principal idea, here's the kind of secondary idea. The left hand then imitates the principal idea, but doesn't imitate the secondary idea. Bit of variety in it. Okay, what happens next? Well, the right hand takes up the principal idea, and this time it's being presented a 5th higher. Now, it's not that he's changed key. He's not gone to the dominant key. He's just put the whole figure up a 5th. Okay, that's quite interesting. Well, what does the left hand do? Well, it does the same thing. It copies the right hand figure up a fifth. But instead of going up to D at this point, which is what happened there, he does this, and this time goes to C. That's because he doesn't want to modulate to G major, the dominant key. He just wants to present this original figure at the dominant. So there's a difference, isn't there? When you're doing this kind of stuff contrapuntally, you can present a figure at the dominant without being in the dominant key. So that's a distinction to make. Then you notice that, you know, this secondary thing that we talked about back here, well, here it is again in the right hand. So you think, well, is the left hand going to do now what it did here, you know, C, C, and have a rest? Well, maybe that's too predictable as well. So this time he says, no, we're not going to do what we did before. So then you think, oh, I know, the left hand is carrying on in these quavers, these eighth notes, so he's going to be using this secondary idea that he used there and used here. Well, actually, does he? It's not dissimilar, but it isn't the same. And it doesn't have this distinctive bit of ornamentation, this mordant figure. But it sort of becomes a continuous stream of quavers or eighth notes. So really at one level it just becomes a bass line, and the right hand is busy doing all these semi-quavers. So now it feels like, okay, there's a kind of principal line in the right hand and the left hand is just providing a bass line. Well, that is true, but there's a little bit more to the counterpoint. Do you notice we've got this 4-note rising figure? B, C, D, E. Then it comes again. G, A, B, C. Then it comes again. E, F sharp, G, A. And then it's extended. So A, B, C. So he's kind of using that same figure. He's repeating it, putting it at a different pitch. We're kind of dropping a third from B to G, another third to E. But what is this 4-note thing? Well, isn't it this from the principal idea? Ta-da-da-dum. Well, dee-dee-dee-dum, ba-dee-dee-dee, ba-doo-doo-doo-doo-dum, and extended. So he's using this original 4-note figure here in rhythmic augmentation. So even though at face value it kind of looks and sounds like, oh, the right hand's doing all the interesting stuff and the left hand's just bunging in a bass line, actually the left hand is doing something sequential with this rising 4-note figure, but the rising 4-note figure comes from here. So that's quite interesting. Now have a look at the right hand. What's the right hand doing? A falling 4-note figure. So what's that? Well, it's the original idea in inversion. There's the original. Here we've got it now coming in inversion. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Then what happens? We go up a third, down a step, up a third. Well, what was this? Down a third, up a step, down a third. So this stuff looks like an inversion of this thing originally. And now we've got... Now, is this a coincidence? It could be, but do you know what? There's so much going on there that it's hard to accept that that is a coincidence. We've got the rhythmic augmentation of the 4-note figure in the left hand, which is then extended. We've got the inversion of the 4-note idea in the original rhythm going on there. And then we've got this thing in thirds that came from the second part of the original principal idea. Now, is that coincidence? I don't think so. Okay, then of course, we had this sort of falling 4-note thing. Well, then we're coming down here. It's being extended. Ta-do-do-do-dum. Well, have we seen an extension of an idea before? Well, yes, we have. This left hand's extending things as well, isn't it? And then what do we notice? We've got the thirds again. Ta-do-do-dum. And then we've got the falling thing followed by the thirds. And then guess what? We've got the falling thing followed by the thirds. So you see how these little fragments, you know, we've got a principal idea and a secondary idea. Within the principal idea, we've got the 4-note rising thing. We've also got this pattern of thirds. We're now seeing how all this is kind of playing out on the counterpoint. So, you know, at first sight and first hearing, you do hear that that is imitating that this is imitating that. And then you think, oh, Bach's given up on the counterpoint now. The right hand is sort of doing all the interesting things. The left hand's providing a bass line. Actually, the counterpoint is going on apace, isn't it? Now, the left hand doesn't give up then, because what does the left hand do? It gets involved in the 4-note thing here. Look. That's exactly from Bach there. And we've got the thirds. So isn't this the original thing? It's the same figure, isn't it? Except this time we're not at the dominant, we are actually in the dominant. So you see what was first presented at the dominant is now presented in the dominant, because we've had these F sharps that have crept in, and we're now solidly in G major, aren't we? Okay, well, then you might think, well, the left hand's just giving way to being a bass line on the build up to a sort of cadence that's happening here. But it is interesting. Oh, it's those 4 notes again in augmentation. Extended. Well, okay, then we're kind of going into a sort of cadential figure, aren't we? In the right hand, well, okay, we've got a bit of disjunct movement, but what's that? It's a falling fifth. What was this? A rising fifth. So maybe that's the inversion of that. We've got the idea of a mordant. Well, we've met a mordant before. Okay, so it's slightly different positioning, a lower mordant over a dotted note this time. But then we've got falling notes. Ya do do do. Well, we've seen them before, haven't we? All back here, and we said that was the inversion of this, and we've got the thirds again. So that's no coincidence, is it? The falling notes by step, then the thirds, but now the thirds extended, and again. So do you see what he does? Sometimes you have the whole of a picture, sometimes you have part of a picture, sometimes you take an idea, you repeat it, you use it in sequence, you extend it, and when you extend it, it kind of adds to the excitement, doesn't it? It's kind of pulling us forwards. We're thinking, oh my goodness, where's it going to end? Well, he's doing that on purpose, because he's driving the whole thing forwards to this cadence. So, you know, you can kind of hear the impact of it from here. Building up towards this cadence. And I love the way he doesn't actually give you that G in the left hand at the cadence resolution point. He gives you a rest of a 16th note or a semiquaver, and then starts again. Now what's he doing? Well, the left hand is now doing what the right hand did back here, look, but in the key of G. So this is just transposed into G, and then he's kind of carrying on with the whole thing. And we're kind of doing this sort of same trick again, aren't we, at the dominant. And you notice now the left hand is leading. Previously the right hand was leading the counterpoint, but here the left hand is leading. What does the right hand do? Well, it imitates it, but it kind of stops early. Well, back here the left hand was following the right hand and it stopped early. Now the right hand is following the left hand, it stops early, but it doesn't do this octavely, it just finishes on a note and has a little ornament, and then it does the same little sort of brief thing again. And then he says, well, you know, now how can we play around with this? So all of that left hand stuff, we've seen what's happening, we've seen what the right hand's doing. Well, now the left hand leads off again, and what are we seeing now? This is the 4 notes that are inverting these 4 notes. And those thirds go on to be inverted here. Have we seen this before? Yes, we have. So we've got the inversion of it, then the right hand copies it, while the left hand carries on with something that's a little bit akin to that original secondary idea. And you notice we've got semiquavers or 16th notes in the right hand, quavers or 8th notes in the left hand, and things kind of switch over. Then we've got more sequence. So ba do 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 do, ba do 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 do, ba da do 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 do. You know, so you see the sequence. And the right hand, ya ba 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 bum, ta do 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 dum. So kind of using this contrapuntal stuff again, you see exactly where the counterpoint's coming from, but with this rising sequence. And then you think, oh, he's just going to carry on. Da, 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 da. A lesser composer would have done that and would have thought, yeah, that's what we were expecting. But Bach says, that's what you're expecting. So let's do something else. So now we get the left hand carrying on with the rising thing. You know, we've had this. And then. But the right hand is kind of using these quavers, these 8th notes from that sort of secondary idea. And now we're kind of wandering off a bit. So you sort of think, oh, D minor seems to be the key. Kind of confirmed. But then we're on the move to A minor. Well, that's okay. It's the relative minor of the original major key, isn't it? So modulation on the go, bit of sequence going on. And you can see where now we've got the left hand being busy with the semiquavers, the 16th notes, whereas the right hand was busy with them up there. But you can now see that the right hand is doing these quavers or these 8th notes that the left hand was doing it. So you see how this whole thing kind of switches over, flips all the time. And so this invention unfolds. But you see how Bach does the contrapuntal kind of construction in a very subtle way. So nothing ever becomes predictable. You've got the same ideas being used over and over again in different ways. Sometimes the texture's this way up, sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes you've got rhythmic augmentation going on, some quite clever stuff. Sometimes we're in sequence, sometimes we're disturbing the sequence, sometimes we're at the dominant, sometimes we're in the dominant. You're getting the idea. And so this thing kind of carries on, and the left hand is now busy doing all this semiquaver stuff in the way that the right hand was doing it down there. And then we kind of build on here into this little corner. And then you look at the right hand and you think, well, what's all this about? Da, 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 da. It's this figure again, isn't it? But this time we carry on in semiquavers, don't we? In those 16th notes. And now we've got both hands busy with the rhythm. So it's kind of sort of building that momentum. So previously it's been one hand busy, the other hand less busy. Now we're both going. And still using these same ideas, aren't we? You know, this time 3 falling notes. Ya da dum, third, ta da dum, third. You know, you see what he's doing with all this stuff. The falling notes here. Da 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 dum, ta dee dee dum, ta dee dee dum, ba da da dum. That's using all this stuff, isn't it? And then he comes to a cadence in A minor. And that's a fairly solid cadence. Notice he has that octave leap in the bass that we first met up there. So that's another bit of joining things together. And then having had all that kind of combined semiquaver 16th note activity, well, guess what? We go back to the right hand leading. Da, do, 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 do. Well, what's all that about? It's the inversion of this, isn't it? With the left hand tracking it, but this time not at the same pitch, but at a different pitch. And then what does the right hand do? It doesn't just carry on doing this. It goes back to the rising 4 notes, falling 4 notes, rising 4 notes, followed by the thirds. Left hand copying, rising 4 notes followed by the thirds, but a different pitch. Falling 4 notes followed by the thirds. Imitated at a different pitch. Falling 4 notes followed by the thirds. Rising 4 notes followed by the thirds. Imitated down here, rising 4 notes followed by the third. So you see what's going on this line. And a little bit of key exploration going on. Looks like we're kind of going a bit F major-ish now, aren't we? And then you see nice sort of extended period where the left hand is in quavers or eighth notes. The right hand is busy in the semiquavers, the 16th notes. What's the left hand doing? Falling 4 notes, the inversion of this in rhythmic augmentation, and again, and again. So all that's going on. And in the right hand, what have we got? Dum ba 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 pom. That's the original thing, isn't it? Then we're going up a third. Ya do 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 do. Then we're going up a third. Ya do 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 do. So this kind of rising sequence thing. And when it gets to the peak of that, well, the left hand comes back with the 16th notes or the semiquavers. Ya do 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 do. So you see how that's now moved into the left hand. But then the right hand. Ya do 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 do. And then even here at the last minute, ya do do dum, instead of da 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 dum, ya da da dum, bom bom. Octave leap refers us back to these corners, and then we get the classic hot cross bun cadence. Hot cross buns, dominant, dominant, tonic. And you see how all of this thing is built out of the original figures, but there's nothing predictable about it. You find ways of extending, you find ways of using sequence, you find ways of flicking the parts over, and you find a bit of key exploration, and it all comes together as a beautifully crafted piece of counterpoint in which there is nothing predictable about it. Absolute masterstroke, isn't it, in writing two-part counterpoint. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. If you're interested in Bach, you might want to have a look at our analysis courses, and in particular, the course which is examining one of the preludes and fugues by Bach from the 48 preludes and fugues. And that video goes into much more detail as to exactly what's going on in the prelude, exactly what's going on in the fugue, how the fugue works, how it all kind of rolls out in immense detail. And that would really give you further insight into this counterpoint and how Bach kind of uses all these contrapuntal techniques, but in this case, in the writing of a fugue. Lots of other courses to look at while you're there, and you might want to have a look at our Maestros groups as well and see if that's for you. www.mmcourses.co.uk